Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have the review of the HUAWEI Pura 70 Pro. Let's get started. This high-end device from Huawei is able to offer us very good specifications, but still a small step below the HUAWEI Pure 70 Ultra. However, the price cut is important and therefore becomes one of the most attractive alternatives for those looking for a high-end device. In Mexico, its launch price has been 23,999 pesos. This is approximately $1,425. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. In Mexico, taxes are included for you to consider. And in this case, Huawei, in addition to this cell phone, includes the Huawei FreeBuds Pro 3, which are totally wireless headphones of very good quality, with which you could complement your purchase very well to have a premium experience. They also include Huawei Care, protecting you against accidental screen damage for 3 months. So considering its competitors, I think it's an interesting alternative. Although it's always worth remembering that even though it's already much easier to install a lot of things from Google natively, it could still present some inconsistencies on very specific things. For example, someone of you recently told me that it's not possible to log into an institutional account in Google Drive. But if you use your traditional Gmail mail, you can log in. So, I insist there are some small details that are not yet polished due to US restrictions. Remember, this is not to do with Huawei and things they don't want to put in, but because of all these limitations that have been imposed on them. But in many ways, it's a device that can satisfy a large number of users. So join me in getting to know it. The design, as Huawei has us accustomed to, will be with ultra-reduced bezels, both on the lateral sides and on the top and bottom. So it's a screen that you'll even find that it has 4 curves. It gives the feeling of being ultra-premium, and the 4 curves not only help with aesthetics but also with usability, because it's a very comfortable screen when you're doing any kind of swiping on it. So, it looks like a high-end device, and it also has a high resistance, offering us an armor Kunlun glass that will raise a lot the level of resistance of this device against falls and against scratches that could occur on the screen. So it is a very high-quality device in this aspect, although it comes with a mica glued from the factory that could give a little strange feeling when scrolling. So this experience could be affected, but it will give you a good level of protection. Although I insist, even without a mica installed could get to have a very good resistance, but I guess the vast majority of people will prefer that this mica remains attached for a long time. On the sides we will find a polished aluminum frame to give a super reflective finish. It looks great and also feels good in the hand. We find the power button with an orange highlight and the volume buttons plus some small plastic bands to help with antenna connectivity. At the top we are going to find a microphone and also the infrared, as this device can function as a universal remote control. On the left side there won't be any special buttons or anything like that, but this profile view serves for you to see that it has a thickness of 8.4 millimeters, so I think it's very well contained in that aspect. And at the bottom we find the tray where you can place 2 nano SIM cards in the unlocked version. But if you buy it with a carrier like Telcel, this tray will be locked. In addition, we find here a microphone, the USB-C port, and the main speaker. The back cover has evolved with respect to the last generation in the sense that it now offers us a completely smooth design, without any special texture either aesthetically or to the touch. So it now opts for a slightly more minimalist design. It is available in white, winter, and carbon black colors. And the feel to the touch of this back cover is also very nice because it's a glass back cover with curved edges again, both on the top and on the bottom and also on the sides. So in the hand it feels extremely comfortable. Also the aesthetics are very nice as it has a satin design that even though it reflects a little bit of light, it doesn't reflect any images. So it gives the feeling of a super premium device. And the new design of the camera module gives a touch of quite originality, as it is a design that we will not see in other devices. Also in this case the acrylic that is on the camera module does have a bit more reflections, also giving a feeling of a dual finish on this back cover. However, this back cover does not come with Kunlun glass or any additional level of protection. So I think in this case it is highly recommended to use it with some case to protect it. The weight that it has is 220 grams, so if it gets to suffer some fall, it can receive a little strong impact. So I insist that the back cover is important that you protect it. Fortunately, the front does have this armor Kunlun glass protection, which is definitely going to be super tough. And if you do happen to drop it in the water, there's not much to be afraid of because it integrates the IP68 level of water resistance, so it can get to be submerged for quite some time at a very good depth. But remember that this level of resistance is ensured with pure water, so if you are going to put this device in a pool water or seawater, it is recommended that you do it for short periods of time and at a shallow depth. And after doing so, rinse it with pure water to ensure that it continues to function properly. The screen will be of excellent quality. It has a size of 6.8 inches and its resolution is 2844 by 1260 pixels. That is, it is a slightly higher resolution than Full HD. Therefore, it will offer a very good level of detail, reaching 457 pixels per inch. Even text with smaller fonts, you will be able to distinguish them with a very good sharpness. And it is also an OLED screen that will offer us a super intense color, very good viewing angles. So from either side you're still getting a good viewing experience and a peak brightness of 2500 nits when you're viewing HDR content. So some areas of the screen would be able to project that very high level of brightness to give a super advanced realism experience. Notice how, for example, in this scene some areas that receive the light rays are able to emit more brightness. And that definitely gives the super premium feel. In fact, the same camera of this device supports this type of photography so that in these areas where there is more illumination, the screen is able to emit more brightness, giving an excellent display of all the photos that you are capturing. The maximum brightness level is considerably high, so you have a very good display outdoors. Likewise, the minimum brightness is very low for super comfortable use at night or in low light conditions, despite not having an additional dimming setting in the accessibility options. And for comfortable viewing, you also have the dark mode or visual rest mode, where you could also select to reduce the flickering on the screen in some scenarios. So, overall, it's a very comfortable display that offers us a dimming rate of 1440 Hz in order to reduce flicker, although that's something that's very difficult to show through the camera and even in real life you don't get to perceive it, but it is a screen that could give you a more comfortable feeling when you use it at night. It also has two types of color calibration. Personally, I prefer the calibration in normal mode, or you can also specifically select the color temperature of the screen. Finally, remember that it is an LTPO panel. This means that it will be able to dynamically adjust its refresh rate. When it's showing movement on the screen, it can go up to 120 Hz, but when it's showing static content, it can go down to just 1 Hz, so that every second it only updates the content on the screen once, so you can reduce the power consumption a lot. So it's a very good screen wherever you want to see it to give users an excellent experience. This device has two speakers, one at the bottom and one in the earpiece area for calls. So this speaker will not only serve for calls but will also output the multimedia sound. Together they achieve a stereo sound with a good amplitude. It also has a good presence of bass frequencies and a good volume. So it is a sound that will not disappoint at all at the hardware level. Let's listen to a little test, though remember it's not the same as listening to it live. But while on the hardware level it has an excellent sound experience, I think the software is lagging a bit behind, as it's not going to offer us too many settings. There are Huawei Hisense sound effects, but they are not available unless you have headphones connected. So we can't customize the sound of the speakers. As you notice, there is no headphone jack, so you need to use headphones via the USB-C port. Or you could also connect wireless headphones to access this section, where we find different surround sound presets. You could even select the type of sound you want to receive, and if you choose the standard setting, you can also access the 10-band equalizer, including a bass amplifier as well. It would be great if this equalizer were available globally and not just when headphones are connected. But excellent news is that if you connect headphones compatible with these advanced codecs, they are available. For example, the LDAC codec, which will offer you a very high resolution sound. Also the L2HC codec, version 2, which is Huawei's own codec. And the LC3LL codec, plus obviously the basic SBC and AAC codecs. So wireless sound through advanced headphones can really give you good quality. In software only, they offer us a function called Sound Booster, which will allow you to send the sound from the microphone of this cell phone to wireless headphones or speakers. So it can help you as a kind of wireless microphone, but honestly, I do not find it so useful, and it is a feature that you could use with other applications as well. The device has 3 microphones in total, one on the bottom, one on the top. The infrared is not to be confused with another microphone because the third microphone is a bit hidden and is specifically located in the larger circle of the camera module, albeit quite hidden and focused solely on noise cancellation. Below you will hear a test recorded with these microphones.
Este audio ha sido grabado con el Huawei Pura 70 Pro para probar la calidad de sus micrófonos. Además cuenta con una función de mejora de voz para tener una mejor captación de este tipo de audios.
I think for this type of recording it performs perfectly well as a high-end device. Below you will see a video recorded with this device to test its microphones in a very loud noise condition, so I set my living room sound system to maximum volume.
Let me show you how it feels to roll the dice. You know you want it. Just say the word. Oh. Whatever we do it just for fun.
And I definitely think that the microphones don't really suffer in this kind of conditions, so it would be a good tool for recording concerts as well. The front camera of this device is 18mm ultra wide with 13 megapixels in its sensor, although an f2.4 aperture that will not allow so much light to enter due to the width of the lens, but it has autofocus, so it has some very good points and other points that not so much. Remember that Huawei has a gesture to quickly launch the camera by pressing the volume button down twice. But this gesture only reacts when you have the device locked, because if you are in any other application and want to enter the camera, this gesture will not work. So I think there is a major point of improvement there. The capture experience will be considerably streamlined and fast. Remember that we are offered 3 different levels of amplitude on this camera, although it doesn't offer us a burst, unlike other devices on the front camera. What we will find is a button to enable some color filters that we can select at the bottom, although we cannot preview simultaneously. Also remember that we will find the capture by smiles, as well as the control by sound to speak loudly or say a keyword to enable the shutter of the photograph. It will also offer us the floating shutter so that in case it is difficult to reach the main shutter, we can press this other shutter. So it has good tools, although it does not have the capture showing a gesture with the palm of the hand. Remember that Huawei always gives priority to using portrait mode, so when you rotate to the front camera it goes straight into portrait mode, which could give you inconsistent results if you have blur enabled. So pay attention to this section. Speaking of which, it has different styles of this portrait effect, and it also has the beauty options with 3 different parameters like unifying the face, sharpening this face, and changing the skin tone. One of the strongest points of this front camera is its range. You will definitely enjoy group photos because everyone fits well framed and well focused. Although in this case, being a photograph indoors, you may detect a little noise present, and that will be its disadvantage. Being such a wide camera, it doesn't get as much light as other devices, but we'll see that a little later in other photos. For now, note that outdoor photos would allow you to have an excellent level of detail while retaining this same level of width. So in very good lighting conditions, definitely that camera has excellent quality and excellent capture of textures and all the details. Although if you don't want such a wide shot, you could also go about closing the angle through the camera interface, and since it has autofocus, it doesn't matter if you're too far away or too close to the camera, you can still get a very good level of detail. And thanks to this autofocus, you could appreciate a lot of details on your face in case you want to. In backlight, the preview doesn't look as optimized, but after you take the picture, notice that it balances highlights and shadows perfectly well, and notice how it still maintains this excellent level of detail that even allows us to see this this mesh that's on the door, so definitely the photographs are of excellent quality and in backlighting it performs very well. But as I anticipated a moment ago, indoors it can suffer a little bit more than usual because there is not as much light coming in. So it starts to lose a little bit of detail and a little bit of color accuracy if there is not so much light in the environment. So in the evenings you would need to have excellent artificial lighting for your picture to come out with good detail. In this case it still maintains good color, although in order to eliminate noise there are some areas where it loses a bit more textures, unlike in the daytime where textures were very noticeable. And in exaggeratedly complex night backlight conditions, the performance is not good, especially because of the color balance it has. If you use the night mode, it tries to improve the result a bit, but honestly, for a high-end device, it leaves a lot to be desired. The same will happen in portrait photographs at night, as the presence of noise is very important in the foreground, and that causes the result to look a little strange. So it is a camera that we could say that it is focused on the day, because in the daytime observe that maintains good level of detail in this portrait mode, makes a nice blur of the background, and even some objects manages to keep them in focus to give much more realism to the photographs. And it is something that few devices can do in the high end with the front camera, although it does not do it with 100% accuracy, as there are some areas where a very artificial blur is still appreciated, but at least it does manage to keep these objects in focus. On the back, we will find the 13mm ultra-wide camera with 12.5 megapixels in its sensor. In addition, it offers us f-aperture 2.2 and autofocus, so it also functions as a macro camera. So consider that this offers us two cameras in one. Then we will find the 27mm main camera with 50 megapixels on its sensor and a variable aperture from f1.4 to f4.0, a feature that very few devices offer nowadays. The variable aperture is obviously going to help you get more or less light in, and it could also modify the depth of field effect. So if you want very even focus, you could go up to f4.0, and if you want very sharp focus, you could use f1.4. So I insist that it is a parameter that usually in mobile devices comes completely fixed, but in this one it can be variable. This camera also has optical stabilization and obviously autofocus. In a virtual way, it could also offer you photographs of 54mm as if you applied digital zoom 2x, and gives you photographs of 25 megapixels if you have enabled the image enhancement option. And finally, we have the specialized zoom camera that gives you 95mm with a 48 megapixel sensor, f-aperture 2.1, so it's a very bright lens considering we're talking about a zoom lens. And we have in this case autofocus as well, optical stabilization, but it also works as a telemacro camera. So we have a very complete photographic system that, even though it only looks with 3 cameras, it could give us the functionality of about 5 cameras. In this case, the preview has a slight delay like virtually all smartphones, but if you are able to capture the exact moment using the screen as the main viewfinder, then in this case you have a very good capture speed. If you take the picture looking at what's happening in the real world, rather than looking through the screen, you're going to notice that it has a bit of an early capture, so ideally you want to look through the screen to get the best possible moment. And in this case, it also has a burst, although it takes about a second to start and lets us take a burst of up to 100 pictures. So yes, you could extract the exact moment, but not from the start. So in that sense, it could be improved by giving a faster burst response. Remember that Huawei offers different types of color rendition through its X-Mash technology. In this case, we are not talking about simple filters, but a complete different color rendition among all these options. In this menu, in fact, we can also access a section of traditional filters, which in this case will be much simpler, but remember that the color rendition can be changed with this part of X-Mash. If you tap on the screen, you can adjust the exposure or focus, but remember that you can access the professional mode to manipulate all kinds of parameters, such as the type of metering, the ISO, which on the main camera can go up to 409,600. In other words, that's a very high ISO that you don't generally see in the smartphone market. You could also modify the aperture, as I mentioned a moment ago, if you are using the main camera, and also the shutter speed with up to 30 seconds of exposure. You also have exposure compensation adjustment, focus, white balance, and this device can also take pictures in RAW for much more advanced photography. So you have very good settings for expert photography. To scan a QR code, in this case, you need to open an additional tool called AI Lens. So from the main camera interface, it is not possible to do this action and requires 2 steps. Also, although it has a document scanner, it's not as advanced as other scanners I've seen lately, which even allow you to remove some shadows or scan multiple pages at the same time. In this case, the only thing it will allow you to do is to adjust the cropping in case it has not been detected correctly, but you have to scan the sheets one by one. Fortunately, you can select several sheets and then send them to print in a PDF file in case you need such a file. But other devices have a much more advanced scanner that could apply a filter so that it does not look like a photograph, but like a dedicated scanner. This device does have a high resolution mode and will do it through artificial intelligence to give you an excellent level of detail. I really love how detailed this photograph can get with the 50 megapixel format, so you can perfectly well crop it and still maintain very good quality. If you use the high resolution option without artificial intelligence, it honestly doesn't look as detailed as we would like, so it is highly recommended to leave artificial intelligence on. And unlike the Ultra model, in this model we don't find such an excellent capture speed on moving objects. Notice how the ultra-wide camera shows a very sweeping result. In this case, the green disc was spinning and the red disc was static, and you can definitely see the difference in capturing this motion. The main camera improves this behavior a bit, but there are still areas that appear with very low definition as opposed to static objects. And the zoom camera is also going to show these kinds of drawbacks, so you need to have fixed objects to have a good result, especially if they are very fast movements. In simpler movements you won't have this drawback. Outdoors, the device takes good pictures with respect to color rendition, although thanks to Huawei's X-Mash technology, you can select between 3 different color renditions, depending on whether you like a picture that looks with brighter shadows or a picture with much more pronounced dark areas. Then it is up to you as a user which color rendition you will choose, or if you want a balance, you can choose the natural interpretation, and that is the one we use throughout the video. In fact, it also has a monochromatic interpretation for fans of this type of photography, and the same will be true for any of the 3 cameras. We're actually going to find very similar colors in all the cameras, and that's a good thing because no matter which camera you're using, the results will actually look very similar. Now look at the photographs with the 95mm camera, again with the different color renditions that are built into this device. I found that the one I liked the most was the natural rendition that is automatically available. And remember that the pictures are 25 megapixels with any of the cameras, so they're quite detailed. On some cameras it does interpolation to give you a higher level of detail, but it definitely looks natural despite being interpolated pixels, so the level of detail is very good with any of the cameras. But do note that the ultra-wide camera has good quality in the center. In fact, I insist that the level of detail is very high and far superior to what other manufacturers offer. However, at the edges we will find a bit of blur and a little chromatic aberration. So it's not a lens of exaggerated quality, but thanks to Huawei's technology to raise the level of detail to 25 megapixels, it does look like a very advanced photo. Now let's take a look at the full zoom range it supports. In this case, you're looking at the picture with 13mm, that is with the ultra-wide camera. And again, a little bit of chromatic aberration is revealed in some of the edges. But honestly, it's a very good quality photograph. Now you're looking at the picture at 27mm, so the main camera retains very good image quality and the level of detail as well as the colors. And this device allows us to take pictures with 2x zoom, still maintaining good quality, although you notice that it's no longer as detailed a picture as the 25 megapixels that it gives us in the other configurations. And note that going up to 95mm we still have a very good quality photograph, although note that in this case the focus could be noticed very punctual. Notice how some objects that were a little closer start to appear out of focus, and it keeps the focus very centered. This photograph is with 10x zoom, and in this case we are talking about hybrid zoom, and the result is still good quality, although it starts to lose definition. Well, obviously this would be the result with 30x zoom, and here I think you start to notice that this would be the maximum acceptable, although the device has greater capacity. It allows you to go up to 100x, but definitely from my point of view it is an exaggerated zoom that is not going to look sharp enough. This would be another photograph with a 30x zoom, where I insist that it would be the maximum acceptable zoom because I noticed that it is not going to offer us an exaggeratedly high quality, in addition to the fact that you also start to see much more chromatic aberration and not so much detail. But I insist this is 30x. This is the photograph with 3.5x zoom, where we are talking about optical zoom, and it is definitely very noticeable that here it does offer a very high level of detail. So the zoom in different ranges seems very good to me, but up to 30x, I would consider that it is still a positive zoom. Beyond that, I think it's a zoom that won't look that detailed. So the maximum zoom, I don't see it having that much potential. And indoors we again see very good quality with any of the three cameras. I like that even the ultra-wide camera manages to reduce noise nicely, although the noise also reduces the level of detail a bit. But it does seem to me to be a high level of photography. Obviously the main camera will be the one that will have the most detail possible, maintaining a good color rendition. And remember that you can choose from any of the other color renditions available, and even if you start to zoom in a bit, notice that the photograph is still very good quality. In this case, even with 2x's, which is a crop on the sensor, giving us a kind of optical quality zoom, even though it's just digital zoom, but you definitely notice that the level of detail is very high, even in these low light scenarios. And the zoom camera performs very well in these scenarios because of the f2.1 aperture. It's a super bright lens considering we're talking about a telephoto lens, and it shows in the result. So it's capable of taking very nicely detailed pictures. In backlit conditions, you notice that the preview is very well optimized, showing a good balance of highlights and shadows before capturing the photo. And after capturing the photo, I think the result is even better. Notice that the level of detail is very high and makes a good balance of light and shadow. For example, the black t-shirt is still noticeable in a deep black color. In addition, we have the most illuminated areas still well defined, without any overexposure. Although obviously the focus is very much on the person. The ultra-wide camera also performs well in such backlit scenarios, so it delivers very good quality. But the zoom camera is still not very well optimized. Possibly with an update they will correct this, because with this camera we will notice that there are some areas that are completely burned out and other areas that are a bit overexposed. So hopefully they will fix that. But the shadow area at least looks good quality. And at night the performance will be good, although with auto mode it still doesn't have such a spectacular result. But note that when you use the night mode, it will reduce noise better. Although in this case it still didn't manage to expose correctly the most illuminated areas, but the noise management does it with a better quality, so the ultra-wide camera is not so spectacular at night, but the main camera is. Even, as I say, if you use the night mode, you will have a slightly better result, especially in the handling of lights and shadows and noise. Even though it does its best to eliminate noise, I think it still maintains most of the textures in a good way. Although there are some areas that can look a bit more artificial. But I do like that the device allows you to use night mode at different zoom levels as well, and note that in this case it even gives more saturation in color when you use night mode. Although it also gives a bit of an odd result in the more exposed areas that hopefully they can fix with an update. And as I told you, the zoom camera, you can also use it in night mode. And in this case, the improvement will be specifically in the most illuminated area, where we will be able to see a little more definition. Although the shadow area and in the dark is going to have a very similar job. And in situations where there is no light source present, the ultra-wide camera may suffer a little bit more than it should with respect to white balance. So it looks a bit oddly colored photographically. If you use the night mode, it gets much better at capturing colors, although the shadow area seems to be a bit more exposed than we would like. The main camera seems to me to do a better job, although in this case again the color doesn't seem to be as accurate because the environment was warmly lit. In this case it looks a bit more neutral lighting, but note that the level of detail it handles spectacularly. Even using night mode, it doesn't improve too much in terms of white balance. And in fact, since it's a long exposure, you might have less level of detail if the subject is in a bit of motion. At 2x zoom we start to notice more difference between auto mode and night mode. Since in night mode I think it gains more accuracy in color rendering, giving a warmer touch as it was in the environment, and in 3.5x zoom I found the result extremely pleasant. You can tell in this case that it has a very bright aperture, because even at night it's going to give you good results with zoom. And if you use the night mode, it even improves the level of detail in some areas. It has excellent color saturation. So it's a very good camera at night zoom, which is one of the most difficult environments. Even with 10x zoom, I think the result is positive, both in auto mode and night mode. And regarding macro photography, again, we will notice an excellent result. Remember that in this case, we are talking about a multi-camera photographic system. So the main camera would allow you to zoom into this distance where you can already extract good detail. But notice how through the zoom camera you could also get macro shots, as it allows you to have a close focus. The result again looks very attractive. And since it has a super macro mode, you can still zoom in when you are taking these shots to get as much detail as possible. Few smartphones today can definitely give you this level of detail. It's worth remembering the object that we're photographing, and it's this central part. So it's definitely very good at super macro shots. And another section where I think the device could improve would be in panoramic shots. This is a photograph with the ultra-wide camera, just for reference, with 13 millimeters. And this would be a panoramic photograph. The panoramic doesn't look as detailed, and it's also only usable with the main camera. So it doesn't look as wide as it could look if we were allowed to use the ultra-wide camera. So panoramic photography is a pending section that could even be improved in color. Hopefully they will do that with an update. Finally, look at the results of the portrait photography. Even with the prime lens, I like how it manages to keep the hair well detailed, which is one of the biggest challenges of portrait photography from cell phones. Also, it does manage to keep the subjects in focus and not just the faces or bodies. So, the result is pleasant even in the handling of lights and shadows. Maybe a bit more saturated than I would like, but we can correct that a bit in editing. It also allows us to take portrait shots with the zoom setting, although it is noticeable that it is not optical zoom. So it loses a bit of detail, but it corrects the perspective a bit to look more like a telephoto camera. And if you use the 95mm camera, the result is again very attractive. Especially again because of how well it handles the hair when applying these blurs. Honestly, it's very good in this section, and again it keeps the objects in focus as well. In fact, with this camera, saturation is handled much more accurately, so it is highly recommended to use the zoom camera when taking portrait shots. Although moving portraits are still an open issue because there are some areas that are not able to come out well in focus if the person is moving too much. But note that through the aperture mode we can take these types of pictures, which could also look like portrait style, blurring the background very nicely and giving an excellent level of detail to the foreground. So it's a camera that really has a very high standard for this type of artistic photography as well. Without a doubt, you are going to really enjoy the experience of taking pictures with this camera. The recording of this device can be at 60 frames per second with either camera, and that's something very worth noting because there are other devices that even in the high end come a bit more limited in this aspect, but this one has all the capabilities including the front-facing camera. Also, the device has a super stable option, although it's going to vary the resolution. And note that it also has a tracking mode which will automatically frame the person who is there so that they can move around the area and you don't have to be moving the cell phone to frame it. Although for that it uses the ultra-wide camera, which is not characterized by offering excellent video quality. When recording video, it will also offer different types of X-Mesh color rendition. And when you start your recording, notice that we have shortcuts to quickly switch between different zoom settings. But we also have a ring that's quite convenient for navigating through all this zoom. There is also a button to capture stills and to pause and resume the video. But the button to rotate to the front camera, which was previously present on other Huawei devices, has disappeared. Therefore, this would be a disadvantage of this generation, although it does keep the button to activate the flashlight without the need to cut our video recording, and in this case it does not have any kind of limit when recording in 4K. Also note that in professional mode we can also access the video recording to be able to move all the parameters that I mentioned a moment ago, although in this case the ISO will be limited to 6400, unlike photography. And it doesn't have some log recording mode to colorize it later, as we might expect from a professional mode of some other devices. The outdoor video recording also seems to me to be of a good quality, although I consider it still a step or several steps below the best exponents in video recording in the high-end segment, especially for the color, which seems to me to be a bit inaccurate, but on the zoom camera it seems to me to have a much more accurate color for some strange reason. So they still need to work on optimizing this, although you can use the different X-Mash modes. Indoors, the ultra-wide camera, just like we saw in photography, struggles a bit to define details well due to the noise reduction it applies. The main camera will be better suited for recording in these types of environments with slightly low lighting, although the zoom camera doesn't do a bad job. Personally, I think it performs well considering we are talking about a low light scene. So we have an acceptable result, although I insist the video recording still doesn't convince me to the fullest. And with respect to backlit scenes, I think we are going to have a good result. With the ultra-wide camera, it balances lights and shadows well. It doesn't have aggressive jumps in the exposure, so the result seems to me to be of a good level. Also, if we switch to the main camera, you will notice that it also has a good performance, although in this case you do notice a color difference between the ultra-wide camera and the main camera. But talking specifically about the balance of lights and shadows is a positive thing. Even with the zoom camera, which curiously in photography did not have a good behavior, note that in video recording it does, balancing perfectly well lights and shadows. It is worth saying that it also has an HDR recording mode that you could take advantage of in compatible devices, but honestly the result seems to me inferior to what the automatic mode gives you. And at night, just as I said indoors, the ultra-wide camera suffers a lot in handling noise. You see too much noise present in several areas, and in the darker area it takes a little while to show you detail. So I think one of its weakest points is night recording with the ultra-wide camera. In fact, the main camera is not going to give us a very spectacular result either, although it handles the brighter areas better. But I think that overall the night recording of this device is not as high level as we would like it to be. In fact, if you try to use zoom in a very dark area, you'll notice that it doesn't make the switch to the specialized zoom camera. But if you try to do it in a very bright area, it will make this change. And once you have this camera enabled, you can head into the darker areas to try to see what result it would be able to deliver. And again, it doesn't have that much illumination input. So, with none of the cameras I really like the night recording, unfortunately, although hopefully they'll correct that with some update to finish polishing it up. Regarding stabilization, recording in 4K with the ultra-wide camera, I think it gives us a good result. This camera, being wider, disguises the movements in a better way. So even when we're running, it's going to give us a good performance. The main camera is also going to have a good experience stabilizing both when you're walking and when you're running. And even the zoom camera does a good job of stabilizing as well. So in that sense, I think the performance is good. Remember that it also has a super stable mode, although it lowers the resolution to Full HD and raises the frame rate to 60 frames per second. So the result can be good for scenes with a lot of action. It also has a portrait recording mode, but it's not very accurate. Unlike what we saw in photography, where it has a spectacular level of detail even at the edges of the hair. In this case, it's a much simpler detection. It even struggles to detect hands well. So I think it's a basic recording even in Full HD at 24 frames per second. Curiously though, it does keep objects in focus but does not change the intensity of the blur depending on the distance. So, let's say it's getting better, but it still has a lot of room for improvement. It also offers us a fast camera mode, but it is simple, even at a low bit rate. So when pausing at any of the moments, you are going to notice a low level of detail. Besides, the most basic speed is 15x, which may be too fast to capture people's movements. So, I don't find it very useful for this type of recording. It even looks a bit unstabilized. But for shooting landscapes, I think the result will be very high level, because it even allows you to go up to a speed of 1800x, so you could capture even the movement of a plant. And one positive thing is that it also goes in 4K, so fast motion for landscapes seems to me to be of good quality. And with respect to slow motion, we can go from a basic one in Full HD at 120 frames per second, also 240 frames per second, which is the result you're seeing keeping Full HD resolution, which is coming along nicely, and the whole video is at 240 frames per second, or we can also go up to 960 frames per second. But even though the video will be in Full HD, I think it actually looks like a scaled HD and the resulting video is at 30 frames per second, only keeping the middle part very slow. I think it's not the most spectacular thing we've ever seen, so I only mention it as a detail. And with respect to how it handles focus, I think this device does a good job. At different distances, notice how the face practically stays in focus at all times. Even objects that you may be able to show can also be captured well by the focus of this device, even in these types of scenarios that are a bit complex due to backlighting. Remember that the ultra-wide camera also has autofocus, so it could very well focus. And even the zoom camera also has autofocus, although it struggles more to focus on small objects, but the face focuses immediately. And once you have managed to adjust the focus on the face, you might find it a little easier to focus on objects. The front camera has the most positive point is the amplitude, so if you are recording during the day, you will enjoy it a lot because it has a lot of space for a very good framing, although it also allows you to zoom the scene in case you want a more closed shot. But it's definitely perfect for blogging in some very large places because it can show all the space. Although backlit, it doesn't perform remarkably well because you notice that the brighter areas can get burned out significantly, unlike what we were seeing with the rear camera. So it still has a good range of improvement in this regard. Although remember, it has autofocus, so that's one of the advantages. You can zoom in on some object to show it to the audience, and it's also going to be shown in good detail. That's a very positive point that not all high-end cameras have yet. Indoors, it is going to be very noticeable that it does not have a very good light input, and this is the negative point of the camera so wide that it has. While in the day we said that it was very enjoyable indoors, or when there is not so much light, there is a lot of noise, and for a device of this price gives the feeling of being a too simple recording, and this will be fully confirmed at night where the light input is even lower. It's going to be very difficult to get a good amount of color back if you're in a moderately lit environment. This is definitely a camera that needs a brightly lit environment to perform well, so I wouldn't recommend it too much if you're going to be shooting a lot of content in low light conditions, although when you go to darker areas it automatically turns on the screen to try to illuminate your face, but it's still not enough, so I personally didn't like the result. With this front camera, you also have a fast camera mode, but it has exactly the same behavior that we saw in the rear camera. That is to say that it goes to a low bit rate and goes to 15x as minimum speed. And something remarkable is that the slow motion with the front camera can go up to 240 frames per second without applying a crop on the sensor, which is very remarkable, although I don't think it's a feature that we're constantly using. But I like that it has superior capabilities to its competitors, so this is one of them and it needs to be highlighted. With the front camera, there is no option to record with a kind of portrait mode, but it does include a dual recording mode with which you have a video a little wider than normal, but you can show both the rear camera and the front camera, and note that it does retain the autofocus and also allows us to zoom, and the remarkable thing is that it allows us to switch between the three rear cameras, although there is a small transition period where it stays slightly frozen. But it is remarkable that it does allow us to switch between each of these cameras to have a lot of versatility, although the video is in full HD and not in 4K, but it can be useful for content creators. In fact, you can also enable a picture-in-picture mode where you have a small floating box that you can move to the position you want with a small limit on the right. You can't resize that little box and you can't rotate without the need to stop the video, so it's a bit more limited. But the funny thing is that if you rotate to make the front camera bigger, it applies an exaggeratedly aggressive crop on the sensor. So you need to stretch your arm too far if you want to come out framed properly, which is very odd considering this front camera is very wide. And remember that this device includes telemacro recording capabilities, so you can get to notice tiny details of very small objects, as in this case, which helped us discover the microphone that the HUAWEI Pura Ultra had. This device integrates MIUI 14.2, so it has the latest software from Huawei, so even though Huawei does not give us a clear update policy, it is clear that it is going to receive a good number of updates, although we do not know how fast it will update the next version. Remember that Huawei is currently trying to develop its own system with its own optimizations without relying on Google and Android. Although this system is still based on Android, so you can still install the same applications that you would install on many other Android devices. Remember that you can more easily install Google apps these days, as you realize. Although Google Assistant would be one of the things that is not available, as well as Google Pay. But most Google services you can use without any problem today. Among them, all these apps you're seeing that I open without any inconvenience. I have a specific video where I tell you everything that has to do with Google, so watch it to see if you are interested in this topic. For now, let me tell you about some of the highlights of this system. Some icons on the main screen can reveal more options if you slide them up. You can distinguish them because they have a small bar at the bottom. Within the themes section, you can much more aggressively customize your lock screen. Whether you want to put a magazine theme with your own pictures or interactive themes, even with some emojis. And note that it has very nice transition animations between the always-on faceplate, the lock screen, and the home screen. So clearly the customization of themes and always-on display along with the lock screen is one of the strongest points of this device. Consider, for example, that some will have much more aggressive and customized animations than others, but they definitely look great. In fact, some themes you can customize by selecting, for example, your own emojis, and it will automatically do all these animations and combinations. That's why it's one of the features I like the most. It also has the always on display mode that you can have in conjunction with the themes or select individually some other cover or phrase or clock. In fact, it has a store where you can buy more available skins. It has Huawei Assistant tools where we will find Celia, which is Huawei's voice assistant, although it is still under development. It can get to control some things in the system, but if you ask it for information, it will search for it on the internet. So it's very simple, reminiscent of early versions of Apple's Siri. The one-handed mode, fortunately, does reduce both horizontally and vertically and has different gestures like the traditional knuckle gestures to take a screenshot or start a screen recording. Although the screen recording is of a lower resolution than HD, that's something that annoys the hell out of me. Hopefully with an update they will allow us to customize the resolution of the screen recordings. Remember that there is also the app dock on this side where you can run these apps in a floating mode, although you can only open one app at a time in this mode, but fortunately it does allow you to resize this small window and also change its position. It also allows you to also pull it to the side to minimize it in this small bar. Another way in which we can switch to this mode is to make a gesture as if you are going to close the application, but direct it to one of the corners and see how it will open in this floating window mode. Or it can also be towards a split screen mode by having two apps on the same screen. Moreover, these apps remain linked in the recent apps list. It also has smart detection options such as the screen staying active while it detects that you are viewing it, and it also has some hover gestures to control your device. So that, for example, you can navigate between TikToks by simply doing this palm gesture. So it can be very useful if, for example, you're eating and you don't want to smudge your cell phone, you simply do this gesture and that's it. In fact, you could also capture the screen by doing this gesture and it can come in handy as well. Note that it also brings the smart control application so that the cell phone is a universal remote control of many brands and many devices. And it also has a tool to measure with augmented reality, although I have tested it and it is not really very accurate. In the gallery it integrates an option to delete objects, although it will not use generative artificial intelligence. So it is to be expected that the result will not be so advanced. Notice that although it detects the body well, it actually fills it in a very artificial way. So it doesn't look like a very realistic result. If you select several pictures, note that it has an option to compare so that both pictures have exactly the same offset, and you can delete the pictures you don't like much easier. You can also create a video or a collage directly with it. Since remember that also one of its outstanding features is that it integrates Petal's clip editor, which is a considerably advanced and nice editor with many options, without adding a watermark when exporting your videos. So, Huawei's operating system seems to me to be on the right track, but it needs to add more unique options for users because at the moment it feels like it's lagging a bit behind. For example, even though it has an X-axis optical engine, it's not going to give us vibration feedback when bouncing off lists or other items, so it could improve in these aspects. The device includes a fingerprint reader that supports up to 5 registrations. It is an optical reader, so it does not offer as much speed, but it works well. In this case, it also allows us to change its type of animation with little variety, but the option is available and also offers facial recognition, but only in 2 dimensions, so it is somewhat simple. It does have smart unlock, but only through Bluetooth devices, so it's not available via location, and it does have other tools like app lock or file locker to maintain good privacy. And the password manager is native to Huawei, but it's not synced to the cloud. So even though it can save your passwords, you can't use them on your other Huawei devices. I think that could and should be improved. We also found an option to search for your device in case you have lost it, and it gives you some suggestions to improve the security of your cell phone, so it can become very useful as well. However, it does not offer us a private VPN as to have a more secure Wi-Fi browsing, but through the permissions dashboard you can see which applications are requesting what permissions and which applications can become much more intrusive to detect some things you do not like. You also have the private space, which is like having two phones in one, and you also have the privacy of images to remove metadata when sharing them. You also have a super privacy mode that will disable camera, microphone, and location permissions so that no application can use them while this mode is activated. Although it does not have a kids mode, there are still some small parameters where the device could be improved. In the optimizer application, you will notice that it also has a malware scanner in collaboration with the company More360, although it is not a company with as much renown as others. And like many other devices, it also has the digital balance options that will allow you to set some usage limits after seeing the statistics of the time you consume in each application. So it comes in handy to set break times or times where the device will not be interrupting you. In addition, you can add a special code and you can manage your children's devices also if they are Huawei devices. Remember that you can also fill in your emergency contact information and other things so that by pressing the on-off button 5 times you can initiate one of these calls. The battery is 5050 milliamperes, and in my tests it gave me a pretty good performance, about 5 hours running this drainer in the foreground, which definitely confirms us that the processor is even good energetically speaking, and that's not a last generation processor. But remember that Huawei usually optimizes its devices very well also in conjunction with the software. I also did another test keeping this drainer running in the background while watching videos, and in that case came to give up to 8 hours with 18 minutes, although the management was more aggressive unlike past generations, where it kept perfectly running in the background this drainer. So now it seems that the applications that it detects that are consuming a lot of battery will immediately close them. But manually you can go to select which apps you want to keep running in the background, so if you have any accessories connected and you stop receiving notifications, you're going to have to go into this section to set that you want to manually manage this to prevent the device from closing these apps. Also note that although it has a normal power saving mode, it does not have a more extreme power saving mode for emergencies. The charger included in the box is 100 watts and also includes USB-A and USB-C port, although they are not intended to be used simultaneously, but it is nice to have this level of versatility so you can also connect your computer or watch or any other accessory. The charger is not exaggeratedly large. In my case, I have a European charger because it is a review unit, but obviously it will be adapted to your region. When plugged in, the device can enable turbocharging if you press and hold on the percentage, and with turbocharging in 15 minutes it gave me 52% power in my test. With 30 minutes of charging it got up to 84% and the full charge finished it in 40 minutes. So fast charging can also become a useful feature on this device, especially when you compare it to Samsung and Apple, who will charge much slower. Also, it integrates wireless charging up to 80 watts, so also wirelessly you could recover from power very quickly, and it has reversible wireless charging, so you can put to charge another cell phone or some other accessory on the back of this cell phone as long as they support wireless charging. Also, in the battery status section, it can give you the current percentage of health that this battery has. Plus, it has smart charging, so in case you're going to leave your cell phone charging all night, so you don't deteriorate the health of the battery, and you can also activate a charge limit. So if you are a cab driver and you want your cell phone to always be plugged into the power, you could also enable this option to prevent the battery from degrading very quickly. So, it brings very good options. The battery can become a strong element of this device in some aspects. In connectivity, we will find a point of improvement because this device still does not have 5G, at least in the version that arrives in Mexico. This could vary in other countries, but it is important to mention it because in China it does have 5G, but not outside China. In addition, at the beginning there was no option to add an eSIM, although now it appears, so it is a bit strange. But the advantage is that it does have a mode where you can select which applications can access the internet with your mobile data and which applications can only do so via Wi-Fi. And speaking of Wi-Fi, in this case, it does support Wi-Fi 6 networks, so it has a good download speed to have an excellent experience, although it integrates Bluetooth, which is not the latest, but it is still acceptable with respect to stability. It also integrates NFC, although not being compatible with Google Pay, there will be few applications that can take advantage of it to make mobile payments. This, I believe, will still be under development. HUAWEI Pay has no plans for global expansion, but you could also take advantage of it to connect to some accessories such as headphones or routers and other things. In addition, remember that it also integrates near-link technology from Huawei, which would be like the replacement for Bluetooth, which will offer us much higher speed. Although at the moment this near-link technology is just under development, but this device already integrates it. It also has wireless screen projection, which will also have desktop mode. In fact, this desktop mode can be both wireless and wired, so it has very advanced projections. And although it doesn't have Android Auto, it currently looks like it does get to be installed, which is a major benefit over years past. Although not coming from the factory, it could generate some inconsistency yet. In addition, its installation could become a bit complex, needing to enable permissions manually and other things, but ultimately you could get to use it. And in the sensors, fortunately, there is nothing to reproach it, since it even has a physical proximity sensor, unlike other high-end devices that bet on virtual sensors that I did not like at all. The Huawei ecosystem, as I have already told you many times, is very complete because it has many devices and also very good interaction between them. The accessories are going to recognize them very easily to link them directly. From the watch you can take pictures, as I have already told you. The alarms are also synchronized with the watch. You can send photos to computers very easily through technologies like Huawei Share. It also has multi-camera, so you can use the cameras of other devices or browse the files on your cell phone from Windows Explorer as if it were another external device. So it has really very good technologies that allow you to enjoy an advanced ecosystem very well, although you are a bit more limited with respect to the control of the devices in the Internet of Things, since Huawei does not bring pre-installed AI Live application with which you could get to use them. But Huawei focuses a lot on the super device feature that would allow you to display other devices and accessories in this section. But outside of China, there aren't that many compatible accessories. Hopefully over time there will be more options. For now, the good news is that yes, you could get to install Google Home with good performance. And with regard to cloud storage, remember that Huawei does show quite a bit of strength in this regard without having to rely on other manufacturers or other companies. So it will offer you backup for your photos, your notes blog, your Wi-Fi networks and other things. You get 5 GB for free, although you can extend this storage up to a 2 TB plan. So it has good features because the entire cloud is synchronized with your devices. Now let's go to the performance test. In this case, I tell you that it has the Kirin 9010 processor. That is the same processor that Huawei integrates in the Ultra model, which we have already proven that it is a pretty good processor. Although it is not the latest generation, Huawei has achieved impressive performance because without US technology has managed to develop this processor that, I insist, is going to be very good. Although in benchmarks maybe it falls a little short, but in real life you realize that the performance is sky high. As you can see, in this case it took approximately 2.1 seconds to open each application, showing a completely high-end performance. That is, in this sense you do not get to perceive any delay with respect to the processors that we would find in other devices. It is perceived as a completely high-end processor. So, really the experience is going to be very good for a large number of people. In addition, it has 12 GB of RAM, so all the applications seem to keep running without any kind of problem, as you can tell. So it's a device that's going to give you a pretty smooth and very good experience switching between multiple applications. Although in this case we just witnessed a reboot, but we hadn't seen it so far. But possibly the strongest point of this device over its competitors may be the storage, which goes up to 512 GB. Its competitors could offer you this storage, but at a price that goes way up. But Huawei offers it as the only configuration available. So even though you don't have a micro SD card slot, with the internal storage you have very good space to store all your files. So now let's test using the Petal Clips app how fast it can export a video with a total length of 1 minute in 4K, and all these clips were recorded with this cell phone. And that's it. It took about 37 seconds, showing us that while it is seen to be several steps behind its competitors in the sense of graphics processing, the experience can still be acceptable for many users. Before we go to the games, I want to show you that in the battery settings you have a maximum performance mode that you could activate in case you want to give it maximum power, although it will reduce the battery life. In this case, we tested it with this mode disabled. And interestingly, within the application settings we are going to find the app wizard that will allow us to select in which games we want additional tools to appear, as well as enable a shortcut to the games area, which is where we can manage all the content we have installed. Also here it shows us additional tools like the special accelerator for games, also a do not disturb mode while we are playing, and avoid accidental operations to avoid any unwanted touch, or that the brightness is moving when we are playing. So it offers basic tools, but at least it does have some additional ones. And when we open a game, notice that we can slide down this bar to again see some of these shortcuts, but now including also the screenshot and screen recording shortcuts. But it also has a special super frame rate option, which is a special engine that Huawei integrates that's going to help the game look like it's at a higher frame rate per second. Although in this case we played with this option disabled, it also integrates quick shortcuts to apps that you can open in this floating mode, so you don't have to leave your game when replying to a message. But curiously, it does not integrate a motion control option, which we had seen in other Huawei. In Call of Duty by default, it gives us the very high graphic quality at a very high frame rate as well, although we can also go up to an ultra frame rate, but the graphic quality drops to the lowest. We could also keep a very high graphic quality at a maximum rate. So, with respect to compatibility, what we could point out is that other high-end devices at the time of choosing the ultra rate go down to medium quality. So, it is just a small detail, but note that it is even compatible with a lot of effects, although not all in real time, but it does offer a good graphics experience. Playing with the maximum rate, the experience goes according to what is expected from a high-end device, which comes as a surprise considering that this processor should actually perform like a processor from a few years ago, but you really do not notice that it is a processor with old technology in quotation marks. Remember that Huawei has had many complications in order to develop their processors due to limitations in the United States, but it seems that their development has been very successful because it really is a processor that in this game at least, and with this configuration, does not seem to be an old processor. It gives us 60 frames per second with a lot of stability and no heating reported, and with the ultra rate setting again the result is going to be very good. In this case, it did reach 90 frames per second with a fairly stable experience, although when recording the screen you may witness some small cuts, but they are really very small. However, remember that the screen recording is in low resolution, so that could also help the performance while you are recording a gameplay, but really the playing experience is very good. In the Legends game, we changed the automatic setting obviously to a setting on the high end with ultra quality at 60 frames per second. And again, it had some minor hiccups, but overall it maintains good performance. Consider also that we were testing this phone on a pretty hot day, so the test was a bit tricky, but actually the performance holds up well. It didn't drop below 53 frames per second, so it performs well with smooth gameplay and good graphics. For PUBG by default, it defaults to HD graphics, but note that in HDR the extreme rate also appears available. So that was the setting we chose, also enabling some other additional things to put as complex a test as possible. And again, the device gave us considerably good performance with good stability, good fluidity when you're running the game and not too much heating. So on a performance level, I think it's a very good tool for gaming, but unfortunately on a software level, you might still find some inconsistencies. Several games will not be able to install, some others will present conflicts with Google, but at least the games I have shown you, we were able to run them without problems. Lastly, in Genshin Impact by default it loads medium quality, but we bumped it up to very high quality at 60 frames per second, and the motion blur was also bumped up to very high. And again, even though it's not completely free of some small frame loss, the performance I think is quite good, although in this game specifically it did get hot in a major way, up to 44 degrees Celsius, which oddly enough felt like it was much hotter, but with the thermometer that we always use it read 44 degrees Celsius. But again, the in-game experience is quite good, although it's advisable to play in a very cool environment if you're going to run this kind of much more complex content. But just as I say, I think it's still not a very gaming-focused device due to the limitations it might have at the software level. In conclusion, this is a device that photography enthusiasts are going to love because it will give us tremendous quality in the rear camera. However, the front camera still has some room for improvement, and in all other respects, it is what we would expect from a high-end device. Very good build, very good screen, very good sound. Although the Google theme could still generate some few inconsistencies, I think they are getting smaller and smaller. So a large number of users could live perfectly well installing MicroG from the app gallery. For now, we have reached the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can point it out, and we'll see you next time.